Okay, and we're live with another episode of The Focal Thought. And my guest today is Anup Rama. Welcome, Anup, to the show.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, it's very rare that I do these early morning interviews, but for someone like Anup, who's up and at 'em early in the morning, I'm really glad to do this. It's going to get everyone's day started. And I'm really excited to do this interview because, Anup, I've known you since probably, I think, the high school days. I actually knew your dad first, who was in the engineering industry. And then I met you through him, through some work we were doing. And what's really nice is I've seen you grow. I've seen you grow from the high school days till now, and that's really inspiring. Sorry, inspiring to see it firsthand. Because, and I'm talking, in terms of your career, the success that you've had. You got into the engineering industry. You got your degree, and then you did the 9 to 5 thing. And I remember you telling me you were in a bit of a rut with that. So then you actually took some action. You did your MBA, and then you went out into the US, and then you got into the oil and gas industry. You've become an expert in that. And the reason I wanted to get you on the show now is you're actually highly sought as a guest lecturer in colleges and universities. So I wanted to know right off, you've been asked to speak on product integration at these lectures. So what is that? What does that mean when you're speaking on that topic?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for those kind words. Um, Honestly, it's just getting to the grind. That's what got me to the US. So just to give you a background, so I did my engineering and my MBA, and I moved from a highly technical role to a quasi technical slash commercial role. And just one thing led to another, and then I landed in the role of product management. And essentially, for everyone that doesn't understand product management, is essentially any company in a business to business segment. So like an Apple or a Facebook or a company that sells pipelines, you're going to be pushing new products all the time. And companies like them, they really want qualified individuals. They really want to understand guys who know what the customers want and bring that back into their company and trying to build, hey, this is what the customer needs are, and this is what our capabilities are. Let's bridge that together and build a new product out there that can be the next iPhone or the next um, Ford, or whatever the new innovative product is.
Yeah.
So that's where the industry went. And from a guest lecturing standpoint, how that went is that in university, 4 years of engineering, I never went through a course that actually taught me that, hey, this is how companies innovate and this is how people build new products. So I thought there was a gap there, and I felt that that could be something that would be beneficial for upcoming grad students. So just an opportunity came up with Queen's University, and essentially it was graduate engineering students and just trying to give them from a realistic point of view how companies innovate. So taking it from a concept or taking it from a customer need or a customer problem or a wish list and building that to a conceptual framework and taking your company's existing core competencies and building on that. So that's really what that was. And the feedback was essentially like, hey, wow, we never even saw something like this. We've always wondered that how companies innovate, but we never knew that this is what the process that it took in the background. And this is what, any company goes through. Like, it's almost like a gating process. And there are people and stakeholders that come in and, really kind of evaluate at each step. Does this make sense? Are we investing, a couple of $1 million into this new product? And is this going to really give us the rate of return? So yeah, so it's really beneficial for both parties. And for me, it was the first time. So actually guest speaking. So, and that turned into something else. And now they've asked me to be an advisor for the University of Houston for their MBA programs. So, one thing leads to another, right? So I think at the end of the day, just getting students to understand that, not what you read in textbooks is not really how people follow in the real world.
That's amazing, and congratulations on the advisory role. So if I may ask you, I mean, you mentioned that, you did go through, the university and product innovation, or sorry, rather product innovation wasn't sort of formally taught, right? Is there a reason for that? Is that because that's something you can only do once you're in the role and you're in a practical environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of both. Yeah, I think more so on, yeah, you need to have some experience in the field, and you also have to understand what the basic concept is. Certain things as an engineer, when you come into an engineering program, you probably don't have an idea, like, what am I doing here? You're probably in that program because either your friends are doing it, or in my case, my dad probably told me to do it.
Yeah.
So you get into that undergrad program. So you would have no idea. So I think you need to have a certain level of maturity and a certain level of experience to kind of understand really how it is in the working world. And that's when, the speakers today or the lecturers today are very academic. They kind of want to know, here's chapter 5 to 6. This is what the quiz is on, right?
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to tweak that and make it a bit more realistic.
And then, from what I know, there's always the two sides to innovation. There's, the side you're talking about, where you look at the wish list, you look at the customer needs, and then you sort of try to design and innovate a product to match those needs. And then there's the Steve Jobs way, where he tells the customer what they really think that they need, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit on those two sides?
Yeah, definitely. Great question. I think companies often struggle with that. So the first one's easy, right? The customer tells you what they need, and you try to find out how you can innovate around that. But the second piece is the hardest one, and that's really the blue ocean strategy. Where you are creating that paradigm shift for your customers, right? So that's when we were always using a keyboard like keypad away for like a BlackBerry, right? And now Steve Jobs shifted that paradigm into a touchscreen, and now look at everybody else. Nobody wants to go back to a keypad. So looking at it, that's a business to consumer segment. Looking at an industrial space, I think people are still trying to have a hard time trying to innovate around that, right? So from my experience, I can speak in an oil and gas environment. The big shift is moving everything to the cloud, right? The industry is just not ready. Customers are trying. I mean, our companies are trying to push that. So where, for example, a petrochemical refinery, there's several processes. How to take crude oil and refine it and sell it to a gas pump at a Sunoco or a Petro-Canada. There's so much data that's being accumulated, right? Like in terms of process and automation. That data is really the recipe for that petrochemical refinery, for that company. And the companies that are innovating around that, they want to push that data to the cloud and essentially tell these petrochemical companies how to do their job, right? So, hey, maybe we can streamline your process, give you a better way to make your process more efficient. But the downside to that, that's the blue ocean strategy, moving it to the cloud and thinking of the next level. But the downside to that, the industry is just not ready to adapt to that, right? And that's where you have artificial intelligence, machine learning, all these new concepts. The industry is just not ready. We're slow on the uptake, right? But on the other side, if you look at banking, if you look at like Shopify, we're already there, right? Because it's a business to consumer segment, and we're just very thirsty for new technology, right? Look at us. You're probably talking to me on an iPhone 12, right? So that's the idea. So it's a two-way street. So companies are trying to do that, but your audience has to be ready. That's really the challenge.
Got it. Yeah. And, just for the listeners out there who don't know, the blue ocean strategy that I'm speaking of, there's a book out there where you can read it, but essentially the concept is rather than go and, fight it out with other businesses in existing competition, create your own niche market and just focus on that. And I think in the book, one of the examples was Cirque du Soleil, where they sort of reinvented, the full circus experience. And, again, it's blue ocean because red is considered sort of like a bloodbath getting into competition. So you create your own market, your own niche, you do your own thing, and then the customers will naturally be drawn to you. So that's blue ocean strategy. And I recommend, any business try that out because, if you're just going to sort of, fight it out with other businesses, it might draw you away from what, your innovation might be, right? You're sort of, in a sense, blocking your innovation by playing someone else's game rather than designing your own game. And I'm just really interested because, oil and gas, I mean, we need oil and gas to function currently. I know, people like Elon are trying to get away from, crude oil and fossil fuels, things like that. and get more sort of into electric. Why is it that they're sort of, considered dinosaurs for moving information to the cloud? Because these days it seems everything should, like you're saying, automatically be put on the cloud, right? Does it have to do with cost or just sort of the mentality of the mindset?
So I think on a cost side, I think we've got to a point where it's pretty much it's a cookie cutter approach, right? So I think they've shown. So think of a company like an Amazon, where they have Amazon Web Services, and that's really the backbone for all these cloud computing businesses that just jump on the AWS platform.
Yeah.
So we have Amazon in Houston today, and you see them coming into a Chevron or onto these big oil companies, and they'll say, okay, here's a proof of concept. This is what we can do. We can push all your data to the cloud, back it up, and we can tell you how to do your little processes. But the downside to it's also cost effective, and they'll show you some numbers that are actually favorable to you. But on the downside, oil and gas has always been a very traditional organized industry, where it's always been like, we want boots at the ground. We want to get the data, paperwork exercises, and they want to keep that data to themselves, because today, the stock price is like, there's only a handful of players in oil and gas. And how do they survive? They survive on what kind of acreage they have, what kind of oil fields that they have, what kind of production that they're able to bring up from that, right? So Chevron might be competing with an Exxon, and they're essentially their advantage in the marketplace is essentially how they do go about getting that oil out of that ground, right? Now, if that data is now in the cloud, it's that fear of like, hey, I'm giving away my recipe, which I've held to my chest all throughout all these decades, right? So
Got it.
that's
So it's
that's that
security.
fear.
So it's really stemming from a security issue.
Exactly. So data privacy, at the end of the day, it comes down to data privacy. And no matter how much you throw at them in terms of educating them and, like, hey, your peers have done it, I think it's your turn now. They're just not ready for that. Let me turn on that switch and go full-fledged, right? But having said that, there's a lot of people like Saudi Aramco, for example, they have embraced it, right, to a certain extent. So I think we're only at about 30% of like what the banking industry or what the retail industry has done in terms of cloud computing.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting. So currently, I imagine they're hosting or storing their data in-house on servers and things like that.
Yeah, so they'll have in-house servers, or they'll do, this is what we've always done before, and this is what we will continue to do, right?
Yeah.
And that's why they're flourishing in a market where everybody else is advanced, and we're still in the prehistoric stages.
Which is more costly, to store it in-house or to upload it to the cloud?
I think it's probably uploading to the cloud, because the upfront cost is very high, because then you have to, change your infrastructure, right? And
Yeah.
remember, you're working on an old, just for argumentative sakes, you're working on an old DOS system, and now everyone's moved on to Windows 10, right? So there's a bit of a, initial upfront cost that you have to do. And now you have to train everybody. And it's also a big thing is that the culture change, right? So that part is the hard part, where you have to get everybody's buy-in to switch to that new segment.
Got it. And I sort of relate to that because, coming from the banking industry, I remember some of the bank software being very archaic and, green screen and DOS based. And it only wasn't until I think very recently, some of my ex-colleagues were telling me that the banks had actually upgraded the software. And again, not because they didn't want to, but because, it's very costly, right, to do that with licenses and updates and things like that.
Yeah, and also the big fear is that, hey, is my job going to be replaced? And that's a very common thing in the oil and gas segment, where layoffs happen like in the thousands, right? And it's a boom or bust industry. And so it's very cyclical, right? So added to that, you're saying that we're moving data to the cloud, and you're going to introduce artificial intelligence. Immediately, everyone's ears perk up, and they're like, wait a second, I'm going to throw red flags everywhere on this.
Correct. Yeah. And I mean, the positive side of, having the data sort of reviewed by artificial intelligence is that, AI can sort of comb through massive amounts of data, faster than a human processing rate can. And it can find patterns or clues or things that can probably better your business, right?
Correct. Yeah. So, for example, the self-driving car, how are they able to do that, right? So, that's the same concept. So they're able to identify new obstacles coming. What if there's a kid that runs by, or what if there's a cardboard picture of a kid standing there? How does the card detect if it's a real life person or it's a cardboard, right? It's that machine learning, that repetitive or circular algorithm that happens, and it corrects itself, right? It's almost mimicking a human, but we're just not there yet. But it's that leap of faith industries have to take, right? And retail and banking, they're able to do that because there's always a big brother watching over that AI, right? Just making sure. But in the oil and gas segment, imagine now there's expensive machines sitting in the field drilling oil, and now you're telling a software to do this, right? To automate these machines. There's a big safety component. If these machines start to fail, it's not just think of like an oil and gas leak or a pipeline explosion. It could be very material for the company. Think of the BP offshore leak that happened a few years back.
And what would like if someone out there is in oil and gas and is thinking of possibly moving it to the cloud, like from this conversation, the first sort of thought that would come up, or the challenge would be, again, protecting your proprietary data. But then, the business payoff might be exponential, right? So what would you say to someone like that? Would you say, okay, take that leap of faith, do it, take measures to protect your proprietary data, but the success that you'll get from the business, both, maybe financially and in terms of growing your business, will be tenfold? How would you try to maybe convince someone or get them to see that point of view?
I think, I would advise companies or people that work in the oil and gas play is, look at your organization in terms of small little teams. So, if you look at an accounting team or look at a finance team, let's automate that, right? Look at the benefits you get. What if there was an AI that comes in and talks to your vendors and collecting that payment back from your vendors? What if there was an AI that says, okay, this is the payment that needs to be issued to a customer. What if I automate that? So you don't have to have somebody there. You don't have to have a team of 20 or 30 people calling on creditors or calling on customers, right? What if a software can do that, right? And then, but you still have to have some sort of supervisory team looking at that. And the initial upfront cost might be small because now you're looking at a smaller team or a smaller, silos within the organization. But then look at the rate of return within that team. You might have had 30, 40 people working on that team. Now you're down to 10, and you can deploy that rest of the 20, 30 people into other areas where there's an issue within your organization. I think that's the way you got to do it. You just can't do a full-fledged approach where you can just take over the entire infrastructure and move it to the cloud, because they have a lot of dinosaur technology within these companies. So to upgrade them you have to do baby steps. You got to learn to crawl before you walk, before you run, right?
Got it. That makes sense. You're suggesting essentially start with the non-sensitive items, like say accounting, and not to say that accounting is non-sensitive, but something that's non-risky, or again your proprietary blueprint, and look at some of the patterns that emerge within the departments, and then sort of make the decision from there, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you can even start off as I don't want to say simplistic, but as less risky as HR, right? What if we can have an AI to screen candidates and train them better based on their needs, right? Something like that.
Correct. And is this where you see sort of companies generally heading towards in terms of AI becoming, part of the company's business structure?
Yeah, I think so, because if you look at any of these top Fortune 500 companies, you'll always have somebody in that chief data officer, or a data manager or data supervisor. That's really what their title is. And then below them, you'll have all these data scientists and the technology people sitting under them, right? And so essentially, they'll just do it like small huddles where they do these small little teams, and then essentially the chief data officer is evaluating, can I do a cookie cutter approach and move it from HR to accounting to, I don't know, maybe field operations, something of that sort.
Got it. Okay. And if I can just sort of, rewind a little bit, getting into sort of, innovative products, talking about the Steve Jobs mindset. I remember years ago seeing an interview online with Steve Jobs, and this is, before he had come out with the iPhone. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, if anyone who's listening. But I believe he had said something that what would be the point of having your media player as part of your your computer device, because he hadn't sort of in his mind thought of consolidating all those features into the iPhone. It was only later on that he did do that, and he had innovated the whole industry. Because BlackBerry had come on into the market. I think Palm Pilot was before them, but they were just sort of very binary with their device usage. But it was really Steve Jobs who sort of took that concept and made it commercialized and mainstream, and sort of made it sexy, and sort of integrated it into everyone's DNA and culture. So what do you think it would take someone to sort of get that mindset of a visionary to sort of innovate the person in terms of the product?
I think we're all struggling with that, right?
I don't mean to put you on the spot. I mean, I'm not asking you to be stopped.
No. If I knew the answer to that, I would not be where I am today. I would be somewhere else. But I think, at the end of the day, Steve Jobs was somebody that's very passionate about what he wanted to do and how he wanted to help his customer base. Today, we get caught up in the quarter to quarter revenue cycles. We want to meet the sales numbers. Let's just do what we did before. And we're also very risk averse as a company or as a culture. And just the new generation coming out, the millennials coming out, I think they seem to be a bit more risk taking. Hence, you see a lot of startups coming in, a lot of money invested in venture capitalists. I think that's changing, but I think the generation that were born in the 80s and 90s, I think I'm yet to see that that shift where they're saying, let's push the envelope a bit more. I think we're still figuring things out as we go along. Maybe that's just me, but I think the passion in your work and the desire to help your customers is what will progress technology forward.
Got it. No, and I like that you mentioned, the generation, which is our generation, I guess, because, before us, we were sort of traditionally employees. We would work for someone. And I think it took a lot of people in our generation to sort of, break that role and sort of, try to get into entrepreneurship. Because I think before, becoming an entrepreneur was a coveted role. People did it because, their families did it, so they had a family business. It was very few that sort of, broke the mold and went into that game. And I think we were sort of the catalyst for the millennials. We sort of made it easier for them, made it more acceptable that they could, sort of just go ahead and do this, right? We sort of broke the ice in that regard.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to ask you this because, you do have a solid engineering background. And I was reading Andrew Grove's book recently. I think it's called High Output Management. And he was the CEO or chairman of Intel that produces the chips. And, he speaks to this. People like Elon Musk speak to this. So you've got the product, which is very important because the product's, there for the consumer. It's also there, for the company to design and to sell to the consumer. So, the focus is on, product design, innovating the product, getting it out there into the market. But if you take a step before that, you get into the sort of manufacturing role. And, manufacturing is, designing the product. And if you go a step before manufacturing, you get into the people that are working into the company. So, someone just, on a surface level might think, okay, companies are really focusing on products and getting them out to the consumer. But the step before that is the manufacturing, because if you don't have your manufacturing game on point, you're not really going to have a good product out there, and you might have to do recalls and things like that. So, people like, Andrew and Elon, and I'm sure other, people in business, they also focus heavily on the manufacturing side, right? Because I've heard of things like, you can design a part that goes into a whole product, but then, once you actually start to manufacture it, you see that there's challenges with that. Maybe at the manufacturing side, it took too long to make this part, or, you weren't able to see how it fit together once it was done, things like that. So I know you've been on the engineering side, you've gone down to the factories and things like that. But can you comment on that manufacturing component and, how important it is related to being before the product?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, so let's take one step back. So here you are trying to pitch the product concept, right? So you might just have it's a paperwork exercise, and then you move on to a conceptual exercise where you might have a field trial with the customer. Again, these are just one widget or one little item that you're trying to test with the rest of the machinery. Now you're trying, so now the market likes it and you're trying to mass produce it. So now the manufacturing capability comes in, and this is where supply chain, which is the art of, or the science of procuring parts for your parts and components for your end product, that becomes so crucial. And the bridge between supply chain and manufacturing has to be like really, really tight, essentially, because they need to be like, the back and the underside and the upper side of your hand to talk to each other, right? They need to be so gelled in. Why that matters is because quality control at the end of the day is what will push you towards pushing a more profitable product out there. So essentially, they need to have repeatability and scalability when you're manufacturing. Personally speaking, I've had several issues with my own products that I've managed where, one product doesn't look like the other, right? And now you're pushing it to the customer, and now that involves, you'll have product defects. You might have to have issues in customer training. The cost at the tail end of it is a lot more when you have manufacturing defects in the front side. So, and that's why it's so much key that, you want to have the right guys at the right jobs, and training of these guys to making sure that they're installing the part properly, assuming you get a correct part that's being sourced by your supply chain. The installation and the operations of your piece. So I've been in automobile conveyors, right, where each part has to work the same. And you're still seeing that where, a lot of recalls are happening on Toyotas and Hondas and other companies where they're saying, hey, airbags can get deployed. And that's where that manufacturing flaw is showing up, right? And the cost is huge because now you have to go return your car, and now you'll never buy a Toyota again because your mind is like, wait a second, it's a flawed product, right? I'm going to move to a Hyundai or something like that.
Correct, yeah. And, it's not only, cost in terms of replacement of the equipment, it's also reputational cost, like you're saying. And, I guess what I'm getting at is people think that the real business is in the product, but really the business is in the manufacturing side of it as well, right?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, you gotta have your internal core competencies in place before you set out into the market and be competitive, right? Sometimes you will see that you will contract it out, right? As a company, you may not have a manufacturing capability. You will contract that out. And now you have no option but to rely on the other company or a third party that will manufacture it for you. What do you do then, right? That's when you got to have strict quality control measures to say every single product that comes out of that conveyor has to look, feel, and function the same.
Got it.
That's the challenge we face.
In that book, the Intel book, I remember he cited an example where, there was someone who was a new employee and the person wasn't trained correctly. And I guess the chips that were outputted at the end of the day, they had to scrap everything, and it cost them $1 million just for one day. So he always stresses, if you're going to try and sort of, maintain some sort of quality check or do an audit on the system or an inspection, always do it at the lowest value state. So try and grab it right up front so that, you try to minimize your costs for any errors, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Yeah. I haven't read this book, but yeah, I mean, he seems to know what he's talking about.
No, it's great. I mean, I picked it up because I think someone online recommended it for sort of management principles, which he gets into. But it was really nice because he got into some of the, the manufacturing side, because that's the business, he says, to a certain extent. And even before that, the people in the company, right? That's the business as well. You're managing products, you're managing manufacturing, you're managing people also, right? And all of those things go together to give the consumer a viable product.
Right.
So what, if I can ask you, what's the recent trend in oil and gas? Is there something that's exciting we should be looking towards, or something that should make us nervous? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think everyone's trying to get more oil out of the same ground that we're all walking and living in. I think that hasn't changed, but I think what has changed is there's been a shift in workforce. So in the oil and gas industry, it's called the Great Crew Change. Essentially, baby boomers who were working in the oil and gas fields have now all retired, right? And because of COVID, that has accelerated. Now, new millennials are coming in, and they're taking over jobs that they would traditionally not take. So the challenge is that you have new people coming in, you got to train them. And the other challenge is that oil and gas is not so sexy anymore, right? A guy coming out of a university today is more likely to join a Facebook than a Chevron or an Exxon, right? So the industry is really struggling to hire talent that's willing to work in the field. So out here in Texas, that's a big concern for us. So we're still getting people that have retired coming into the field and trying to, hey, can you please help us train these new guys who are coming in? Because it's hard for us to kind of get them on board. So that's the first challenge. The exciting part of it is, I think, new technology is coming out, right? Before you might have had 30, 40 people working on the same equipment. Now you only have maybe 5 or 6. And because of the new, the drone technology, for example, satellites and that sort of thing, you're able to get remote operations. So for me, I could be sitting on my computer in Houston, and I could be watching and operating an oil field somewhere in Midland, Texas, or West Texas, which is a couple of hundred miles away.
Yeah.
So that technology has really picked up a lot. So that's the easy part for us, or that's the exciting part for us. But the difficult one is to get people to come in and buy in for this industry. It's like, hey, this is a good field for us to get in. So that's the challenge.
Why do you think there's that sort of stigma of people wanting to come into the industry? I mean, I've heard like through the grapevine, for some people, they say that it's a volatile industry in terms of when there's no oil to drill, they shut off operations, which leads to loss of jobs, things like that. And then when they start drilling again, they start to rehire. So it almost seems like it's volatile. It's maybe fluctuating because of the market or supply and demand. Do you think that might be sort of a stigma in people's minds?
Absolutely. I think nobody wants to join a cyclical industry, right?
Yeah.
And then they also want to know, hey, if I learn whatever that I'm learning from this field or from this industry, where can I use the transferable skills to something else, right? Immediately they think it's like, hey, maybe I can go to mining or pulp and paper, like in field operations point of view. But the people that are coming in, they're more tech savvy, and they look at the oil and gas as like, man, I don't want to join this field where I don't want to be pumping oil out of the ground. I'll let the experts do that. I would much rather be at the management level, right? The expectations are high. So I think you've got to earn your stripes before you get to that level, right? I think that mentality hasn't sunk in yet.
Got it. And in do you foresee a time where the oil and gas industry is not there anymore because new technology, new fuel resources have taken over, sort of green fuels, things like that? Do you see that as being possible within our lifetime?
I would say not. I would say for the next 20, 30 years. So, probably not in our lifetime, I would say. But I think for the millennials that are coming in, definitely, I think renewables are going to come up. I think oil and gas is going to, slowly wither away. But you're still going to have that. But I think wind, hydro, geothermal, they will start picking up. That's why you see more electric cars now. There's been a bit more of a push towards renewables and green energy and climate change, right? I think that's here to stay. And you also see that change between oil and gas companies. They're also shifting. Okay, in addition to oil and gas, will also invest some money in hydro or wind, right? So they're also looking at that change.
And like you're saying, I mean, even if we do see a phasing out of the oil and gas sort of commodities, like you're saying, the skills are transferable. So it's the same sort of business that you would do day to day. It's just that your product is now changed, right? So if you're sort of currently in the industry and you're worried about it phasing out, if it does phase out, you can transfer to a different industry, right, and apply the same skills.
Absolutely. I mean, today, I did, I went from industrial controls, working on small machinery in Canada, down to in the field, working in an oil and gas field. And then I moved into, petrochemical refineries, and now I'm doing chemicals, right? So it's all transferable skills and how you can pivot, right? I think the ability to pivot based on industrial change in your career, I think that's really key for any employee or any upcoming millennial that's coming up, right? I think we all pivot in our ways. We change to our circumstances. I think it's no different here.
Got it. Amazing. Anup, I know we're almost out of time. I want to ask you one final question. And, and I want to ask you this because you've been through the ropes, right? You've been through the degree, you've been through the MBA. For students today who are sort of, going through the same stages you did in school, where school is sort of, very theoretical, academic based, and very recently we're sort of getting into, practical aspects, that they're implementing into schools. But like you're saying, the real fun happens once you graduate and you get into a role where you're seeing things happen, live in the field. What would you advise or, recommend to students to sort of, keep their chin up and to sort of, make it exciting, while they're studying, because they're not sort of seeing the effects of what they're studying immediately, right? They're all sort of investing in that time to get a future payout. Is there anything you can advise, just sort of, from a motivation point of view?
Yeah, I think whatever program you're studying in, I would encourage you to, in that summer that you guys are off between classes or when you graduate, land that. It's hard to land that role within your industry. I get that, but I think work towards that. And when you do get land a job, you might get a desk job. But I highly encourage you to get out, work your local sales guy and get to the field and listen to your customers. Why do they buy the products of your company? And understand, what is the pain point, what solution are you providing, and are you really solving their problems? I think that will change your mindset on like, hey, wait a second, maybe you could be innovating the new Facebook for all you know, right?
Yeah.
But you just don't know yet. So I think that's the thing that I would say: get out in the field, talk to your customers, understand what problem are you solving, and can maybe something else triggers in your mind to solve that next puzzle.
God, I like that. So, focus on your studying as is, but look forward towards, being out there in the field, because the field is where the action is, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Anup, for this conversation. And I'm sure like a lot of our listeners have, learned something. I myself have learned something about, the oil and gas industry, because, again, it's something it's the coveted industry. If you're not in it, you really don't know, how it operates, and like what you're saying, what the infrastructure is, what the challenges are. So for you to come on here and make it simple, and, thank you for that. And again, I wish you all the best in your career, and, with your new role as advisory, and, with your lectures, because, it really takes someone like you who's been through the ropes and who's got the field experience to pass that on to, upcoming students. That's valuable and priceless. So I wish you all the best for that.
Thank you for having me. Thanks everyone.